Black Death skeletons were found buried under a chapel at the Tower of London. In Belgium, archaeologists found 9 walls made entirely from human bones. And deep under a church in northern Poland, a real 17th century vampire burial was discovered. These are disturbing discoveries made under religious buildings. In July of 2025, archaeologists were digging under the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula inside the Tower of London when they made a pretty grim discovery. They found a bunch of skeletons buried under the floor, and based on early testing, a bunch of them probably died during the Black Death in the 14th century. Under one of the most famous tourist sites in England, there's a massive grave from one of the worst pandemics in human history. They also found signs that some of the burials were earlier nobles, buried near the altar, which was a status thing back then, but others were clearly hastily buried, again, probably plague victims. And there's no indication the ground was sanitized or protected, it was just bodies on top of bodies. This church is still used for services and ceremonies, so it's pretty creepy that all of this was just lying underfoot, and not all that deep. Some bones were sitting just a few feet below the floor. Makes you wonder what else is buried under old churches, because this wasn't even supposed to be an excavation originally. They were just doing renovations when they found them. You may not know this, but a lot of people die, and they've been dying for a very long time. There are a lot of bodies to bury. So how did ancient cities handle running out of space? Well, in Ghent, Belgium, they dug up old cemeteries and built 9 walls made entirely out of human bones under St. Bova's Cathedral. Archaeologist Yannick de Gries, who led the dig, said, "We have never seen structures like walls which are intentionally built with human bones." End quote. So these walls are mostly made from adult thigh and shin bones mixed with some broken skulls, but the smaller or more fragile bones like ribs, vertebrae, or children's bones, they weren't used. Even arm bones were left out, probably because they didn't fit right, size-wise. The bones date back to the 1400s, but the walls were probably built in the 16 or 1700s. Above the walls, archaeologists found full skeletons from a newer cemetery, meaning people kept burying bodies on top of these bone walls after they went up. De Gries explained that the, quote, faithful believed in a resurrection of the body. The bones were considered the most important part, end quote. So it might seem creepy now, but building these walls was seen as a respectful and practical way to honor the dead, making room without tossing bones out. News of this came out in 2024. Under a church in northern Poland, archaeologists made a seriously creepy discovery, a so-called vampire tomb with a sickle placed around the skeleton's neck. This was found during conservation work at the Annunciation of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Actually, the first time a vampire burial like this has been uncovered inside a church. The sickle was probably meant to decapitate the supposed vampire if he ever tried to rise from the dead. Archaeologist Dr. Justina Karkas studied the remains and said, "The skull with numerous injuries indicates the man had many deep scars on his face during his life. During one of the blows, he also lost some of his teeth. He looked different than average people, and that can be scary." End quote. She added that the man who died in the 17th century was actually accused of vampirism back then. Vampire burials with sickles aren't really unheard of in Poland or really across Europe. Legends warned about the dead coming back to torment the living. So to stop these restless souls, people would bury bodies with sickles around the neck, bind their hands and feet, or bury them face down. Back in 2022, archaeologists were digging under the Temple of Taposiris Magna near Alexandria, Egypt, when they came across a massive underground tunnel cut straight into solid rock. The thing runs for over 4,300 feet, sits 43 feet underground, and was described by the Egyptian Ministry of Tourism as a, quote, geometric miracle because of how precise the construction is. It's nearly 7 feet tall, just wide enough for someone to walk through, and eerily straight. It runs under a temple dedicated to Osiris. Some believe it could lead to Cleopatra's lost tomb, which is why the whole dig started in the first place. Archaeologist Dr. Kathleen Martinez, who's been leading the excavation for years, has already found coins, statues of Isis, pottery, underground chambers nearby. Some parts of the tunnel are flooded and it's just too fragile to fully excavate right now, but what they've seen so far has blown them away. Nobody knows what it was really used for, but the fact that it stayed hidden for over 2,000 years under what became a religious site, and that it's still mostly unexplored, it makes it one of the most interesting finds in recent archaeology in Egypt. There's a cave under the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem that most people have never seen. It's called the Well of Souls, and it sits right under the foundation stone, a sacred place in Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. You reach it by going down a narrow staircase, but it's closed off to the public now and hasn't been opened for years. The room's just a simple chamber carved out of limestone. The name Well of Souls came from medieval Islamic legends, claiming it was a place where souls waited for judgment. But that's said to be more folklore than anything else. It was also known to Crusaders as the Holy of Holies because they thought it marked the inner sanctum of the old Jewish temple, but modern scholars say that sacred space was probably above the rock, not inside it. The place hasn't been studied properly and barely anyone gets to see it, but it's still there, sitting under one of the most fought over religious buildings on Earth. Sitting under a regular neighborhood in Malta is an underground burial site that was built over 5,000 years ago. It's called the Hypogeum of Ħal-Saflieni. It's basically a giant cave system carved into the rock, with rooms and tunnels where around 7,000 people were buried. The bodies were stacked in layers, sometimes with pottery or statues buried along with them. One room, called the Oracle Room, is famous because if you make noise in there, the sound bounces perfectly around the space. It was obviously designed that way on purpose, maybe to use chanting or music in their ceremonies. This place was accidentally discovered in 1902 when workers digging for a new building broke through the cave roof. Since then, archaeologists have found all kinds of bones, tools, and artifacts, like the little statue known as the Sleeping Lady. This is one of the oldest underground cemeteries we know about, showing how seriously ancient people took their burial rituals. In Zutphen, Malta, a routine repair job in the late 60s revealed something disturbing under St. Catherine's Old Church. There were 3 hidden tunnels packed with human skeletons. Archaeologists later found that these bones belonged to around 90 people. Some moved from old cemeteries, others may be victims of a 1614 Ottoman raid. The tunnels have been sealed up and forgotten for decades. Alongside the skeletons, they found artifacts like Byzantine-style crosses, old coins, pieces of medieval chainmail armor. They're not exactly sure why the bones were buried like this, but historians think the tunnels may have been used to hide remains during wartime or to store bones moved from church cemeteries. See, back in the day, especially during war, disease outbreaks, or raids, churches sometimes had to dig up cemeteries to make space or protect the dead from being desecrated. So instead of reburying the bones in public graveyards, they'd sometimes stash them in ossuaries or in tunnels under the church. On the eastern edge of Jerusalem, there is a small religious site called the Chapel of the Ascension that marks the spot where Christians believe Jesus ascended into heaven. The site has changed hands a bunch of times over the centuries. It started as a Christian church, was later converted into a mosque, and now has parts of both. But here's the part most people don't know about. Underneath, there's a hidden stone crypt that dates back about 1,500 years. You can get to it by going down a short flight of steps. The chamber is small and pretty bare. There are stone benches carved into the walls and a few old inscriptions in Greek that mention early Christian names. Archaeologists say it was probably a burial chamber from the Byzantine period, back when churches often doubled as tombs for religious leaders. Workers restoring the 12th century church of Saint Philbert in France accidentally found a hidden staircase buried under the sanctuary. The restoration started because the church's old concrete slab installed in the 70s had trapped salt under the building, causing serious damage to the foundation. So as workers dug about 10 feet down, they came across a 400-year-old sealed vault that no one knew existed. Inside the chamber, archaeologists found coffins holding adults and children, bodies wrapped in shrouds and layered to make more room. There were also 6 stone sarcophagi dating back about 1,500 years. A few rare coins, 2 rosaries were also found, but nothing flashy. It was more about the bones and structure than the treasure. INRAP, France's National Archaeology Institute, officially officially confirmed the discovery in 2025. For generations, people in Atlixco, Mexico have passed down stories about a hidden indigenous temple buried under a Catholic chapel on San Miguel Hill. According to the legend, long before the Spanish built the church that's there now, the Nahua people had their own sacred temple called a Teocalli, right on that same hill. Well, in 2023, a team from Mexico's National Institute of Anthropology and History found actual proof while doing reinforcement work on the chapel. Archaeologists found pre-Hispanic clay pots, stone tools, and decorative ornaments buried under the church. When they dug down deeper, they found walls and flooring from the ancient temple, just a few feet under the modern foundation. I've been your host, James. I will catch you, yes, you specifically, in the next video.